Gators Breakdown episode 46 is ready to go, where we are going to ask and answer the question, how much is Florida a contender in 2017? I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC, and I am joined by our featured analyst here on Gators Breakdown, Bill Sykes. You can find him on Twitter at RealBSykes. Co-host Joey will probably join us on the next episode. He's going to take the night off on this one, so it's going to be the Bill and Dave show on Gators Breakdown tonight. Yeah, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites and get the links, or get the links by following us on Twitter at Gators Breakdown, and on Facebook, just search Gators Breakdown. Also, share the show if you like it and leave a review and rate on iTunes. Helps us out a good bit there. And Bill, before we start, I just wanted to thank everyone that has listened and checked us out here on Gators Breakdown over the last couple of weeks. It's been our most successful time here on Gators Breakdown, and we just want to thank all you listeners out there and the messages you've been sending and all the shout-outs and the interactions with Joey, Bill, and myself. It's been fun the last couple of weeks as we've I've gotten everything out there for signing day and reviewing signing day and all the coaching hires, and pretty much been our most successful couple of weeks there. So wanted to thank everybody out there. Bill, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody who's given me feedback as I've joined the show here. I've had a great time doing it. Those of you who've followed me on Twitter at RealBSykes, that's S-I-K-E-S. I've really enjoyed talking to you guys, and I'm hoping we can have some good dialogue moving forward. I think we're going to have some good shows.
Yeah, thanks for the 24/7 Gator Bait board as well, Alligator Adley. Kind of set this up. SU Gator helped us out there and kind of joined us there, and it's kind of joined our partnership here on Gators Breakdown, and it's been fun. I was talking with the guys on there too, as we have been. So, Bill, spring practice is about to start in 2 weeks for the Gators, and the expectations from fans are Florida should be taking the next step in year 3 under Jim McElwain. How big should that next step be? We started throwing around the idea for this show last week before ESPN threw out an article discussing how Florida is a sleeper for the college football playoff. So now we're going to dive into this issue we were going to dive into this issue before the article was posted. We were already talking about it. So changes things a little bit. Maybe we extended our conversation to the college football playoff. But we'll discuss our thoughts on how far we think Florida can be a contender in 2017. So I have 3 ways I look at this. Can Florida win their division again? Can they win the SEC? Can they make the college football playoff? Now, many factors go into this: the roster, the coaches, the schedule. We'll talk about all that. But Bill, let's get started. Dive right into what you think of how much of a contender is Florida based on the roster.
Well, there's a lot of components that go into that, and I just want to say right off the bat, one of the things you're going to hear me kind of saying, it's going to be an overtone throughout what I say, is I kind of think that 2017 is not quite the year for McElwain to break out at Florida and to start dominating the football landscape. I think this is a setup year for some more growth. I think it's a setup year for a little rebuilding. I know that might sound like an odd term in year 3. I don't think he is on that trajectory of Nick Saban coming into Alabama, of Urban Meyer coming into Florida. He's had a lot of adversity. There's been a lot of issues between Will Grier and the aftermath of the Muschamp regime, a changing college landscape, some of the challenges with facilities. Everything has been documented. I just don't think we need to put too much on him too soon. Having said that, that doesn't mean that they can't surprise this year. It doesn't mean they can't win the SEC this year. It doesn't mean that all our wildest dreams won't come true. But what I'm saying is I think we need to look for progress. I think there's a few key things that need to happen this year. But based on the roster, there's several components we're going to have to kind of analyze going forward here, Dave, tonight to give people a better idea of what needs to happen, what the challenges are. Can it happen? Yes. I think they might still be a year away.
I agree, Bill. And first and foremost, we know where it starts. We've known the main issue since Jim McElwain, even before Jim McElwain, but it was what he was supposed to come in and fix is the quarterback position. And you mentioned the Will Grier issue, what happened there. Who can tell where Florida would be right now if Will Grier was under center? But we can move on. He's not. It's Felipe Franks. It's Kyle Trask. If this team is going to take the next step that fans are looking for, we know now, no matter if Luke Del Rio had the chance to come in the fall and be the quarterback for the Gators, if it is him, we know there's a ceiling, I think, to the season. With Franks and Trask, there might be still that same ceiling, but at least there's potential for growth.
Yeah, listen, Del Rio could come in and be better than we expect. He could be the starter, and people need to get ready for that possibility now. It may not be Franks. It may not be Trask. It could be Luke Del Rio or Jake Allen for all we know. I mean, this could happen, and we got 4 guys that are going to have passes thrown in camp. We got a spring to go through. It's going to have to shake itself out. I kind of tend to agree with you, and I think most fans look at Del Rio as somebody that's what we have now labeled as becoming a cliche as a game manager. Okay. And in certain offenses, on certain teams, that's fine. Okay. But what that really means is you manage the game. You make the clutch passes you have to make. You don't have to throw for 250 yards a game and 3 touchdowns. Manage the opportunities we give you. But the inference there is that you can manage the game because we are going to win with another component of our roster. Whether that be a dominant running back, whether that be a receiving core when you have a Percy Harvin on the field where you say, hey, catch this, 1 yard down the field and now take it 99. Or if it's a suffocating defense. And see, that's the thing is we have had the defense in Gainesville for a few years to have a guy that can come in and manage those opportunities to get the clutch first downs, put up 24 points or 27 points on the board throughout the game. Couldn't do it. But is that window still open? I don't know. Because we've got some real defensive turnover going on now. So I don't know that a game manager cuts it. I think we need that higher ceiling that you're talking about from a guy that can sling the ball, can bring back a little bit of those memories of the fun and gun or whatever that may be, a guy that's going to take Florida to victory. And personally, I don't think it's Del Rio. I think if it's going to be somebody on the roster, I tend to think it'll be Franks or Trask.
I agree. You got to have somebody who can make every throw on the field with what Florida has on offense right now. I completely agree with what you're saying, as in if we're looking at Del Rio and him being labeled as the game manager type, at times I don't even think we got that from him last year. And that's kind of our point. It's just, the reason Alabama can do it is there's 5 stars littered on the roster. So, when we want to compare with what Florida has at quarterback to other programs and, why Luke Del Rio isn't enough, that's partly the reason why. Yes, they have a superstar receiver in Antonio Callaway. But, during this season, you had the emergence of Tyree Cleveland, but there was nobody else really consistent behind Callaway that you could count on game in and game out to come in and be a reliable wide receiver. And then with teams being able to stack the box, as good as a running back as Jordan Scarlett is, when he's facing 7-8 guys in the box, there's only so much he can do. So you get that quarterback, and as mentioned it before, it opens up this offense so much. And I don't think a quarterback like Luke Del Rio does that. So in order for Florida to start winning more games, start putting more points on the board, they're going to need a quarterback that can stretch the field, make every throw, make a threat to where these guys can't line up in a box and just key on the Florida running game, because that's really what only Florida could rely on game in and game out. We saw it, yes, against LSU, but that was another team that had its own quarterback problems and another offense that couldn't get out of their own way. Yes, Florida eventually wore that team down, but if LSU was sitting there lighting up the scoreboard, that game plan wouldn't have necessarily worked.
Yeah, and I mean, if Jordan Scarlett or Mark Thompson, whoever it is that comes in and can tote the rock for Florida, if they become a dominant all-SEC capable running back and the offensive line makes the next step, which we'll talk about them in a few minutes, and that becomes a competitive advantage, something that every week when teams come into Gainesville, they're saying, oh, man, are we going to be able to stop this running game? Then all you need from your quarterback is a guy to keep the defenses honest, and that's what Florida has not had. Even though we've had a couple of good running backs on the roster, with that young offensive line, people have loaded the box. They say we're going to, mess up the cap protection. We're going to just cause confusion and put these guys back on roller skates. And you didn't have that quarterback that could throw a play action pass. You didn't have a guy that when they're running wide open down the field could consistently deliver the football, and that's got to change. And so I think it's almost like a sliding scale of what you need from your quarterback. The better those wide receivers and more so maybe the offensive line and running back, the better they get. Well, maybe you don't need quite as much from that quarterback. It's a direct relationship there. But until proven otherwise, they got to go get a guy. And I think that this goes beyond schematics. It goes beyond just points per game and maybe even winning a game. I think bringing in a quarterback that starts to change the identity and shake off the yuck that has been on this program's offensive ineptitude for so many years is going to send a signal to fans, to recruits, to the team itself, and it's going to send a new energy. And I'm telling you, they come out in a key game, whether it be Michigan or Tennessee early in the year, and you have a quarterback that pops for 303 touchdowns against a real quality opponent, you watch what happens around this program because people want it bad. The recruits want to see it bad. They want a reason to say this is the Florida of old, not the Florida of Will Muschamp that punted on second down. It's got to change. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, and you're right, because you got in the defense in interviews and talking to the media, they can say the right things, but you can't tell me it doesn't go through their head game in and game out, and especially late in the season. Oh, here we go again. You know, we have to carry this team, and you know they go into the locker room at halftime, and it's all on them. You know that pressure becomes too much, I think, at times. So as good as the defense is, you know, eventually just get worn out. We saw it in the second half of the Tennessee game where Florida's offense couldn't stay on the field. You give an offense, any kind of offense with a pulse, time and time again to score, eventually the defense is going to break through. The defenses are going to break. And that also adds up as the season goes on. There's a reason when they play Florida State and the offense can't stay on the field. FSU's got time and time again or in good field position, many drives to put something together. It's eventually going to happen. It's the same way with the Alabama game. You know, that game, if you looked at it, it didn't look like the blowout that it was. I think Florida had a really pretty good game plan going into that Alabama game. Austin Appleby couldn't stop throwing it to the other team. But if you look at the game as a whole, you know, that was probably one of Florida's best game plans for a game this past season. Yes, it was against Alabama, but you know, Florida moved the ball a lot better than I think teams did. So I think there's enough to look at there to say, okay, Jim McElwain, he knows what he's doing if he could just get that signal caller. Yeah,
I think so too. And if you look at the statistics over the last 10 years, I mean, the passing offense rank dipped down into the hundreds under Will Muschamp, and it has steadily improved. And believe it or not, it was up to 79th this year in the nation in passing. And I'm not saying that like that's a token in his treasure box there, but you know, it's better and it's improving. And I mean, I believe it was 2008 where I believe the passing offense was like in the 60s with Tebow. But that's because they had Harvin. They had a dominant running game with Tebow and, you know, with the offense they had. And like I said, you don't have to be, you know, top 10 in the nation in passing. You have to find a competitive advantage that allows you to win football games. And the Gators just simply haven't had that. And so whether that be 250 on the ground and 250 in the air, whatever that may be, they've got to find it. And to be a contender, it's going to have to get a lot better. The good news is, while they're sitting at 79th, when you talk about rankings improvement, they only average 215 yards a game through the air. But, you know, you go all the way up to 51st in the nation, well, that's in the 240s a game. So you were talking about 30, 40 yards a game, 2-3 big passes on third down, a play action pass. It doesn't take a whole lot to find that guy. The bad news is, while Franks or Trask, Allen, Del Rio, whoever it may be, if it's one of the freshmen, history tells us that year one is typically not the year they take their teams to the title. Of all the SEC teams, all the SEC champions since 2006, since Tebow and Leak were here, only one of those was led to the SEC championship by a freshman, and that was this year with Jalen Hurts. And as we talked about, he could pretty much manage the game because he's got these, you know, 5-star athletes all around him. That was their competitive advantage, as they could say, don't lose the ball game. And I don't know that Florida has that. I think we both know they don't. When you look at the playoff teams, of the 3 years they've had playoffs, only 2 quarterbacks that were freshmen led their teams to the playoffs. One of those being Hurts, the other one being J.T. Barrett in 2014 for Ohio State. Now, he didn't play, I believe, in the playoffs because Cardale Jones had to come in due to injury, but Barrett did lead them there. But everybody else was a sophomore, junior, or senior, and it's disproportionately slanted towards the upperclassmen. So, again, I think we need to give our quarterback, if it's a freshman especially, a chance to come in and look for that growth. Yes, look for that signature win, maybe against FSU at the end of the year when he's had a chance to get his feet under him, as this offensive line starts to grow and the continuity starts to establish itself. But I don't know that we should expect a new quarterback, particularly a freshman, even if they've had a redshirt year, to come in and lead the team to glory in year one. It just doesn't happen a whole lot.
Bill, before we move on to another position from the quarterbacks, do you believe Florida has the right coaches in place to help these quarterbacks take the next step? We know Doug Nussmeier gets a lot of flack, but there were times, and a lot of coaches can say this, a lot of teams can say this, but there were times I saw plenty of plays that were to open, and especially the Florida State game, Callaway on a corner route that's just completely overthrown and out of bounds, throws down the field. Earlier in the LSU game, before the Appleby pass to Tyree Cleveland, that was the second time they tried that play when he scored. The very first time it was there again, and Appleby overthrew him. They came back to it and luckily got it. But there's just two plays that just pop up in my head, right away that I can remember. I was like, there are plays there to be made, and the quarterback either just doesn't see it, can't hit on the deep ball, and I don't think what we've seen from Franks and Trask, from at least their size and from what we've heard, these guys can launch the ball down the field. So good plays are there. Can they dial up plays? I think we've seen enough where they can dial up some plays to have some success. But can they, I guess not necessarily even game day, can they, and we've heard how raw Felipe Franks is, can they, turn him around? Can they let him be a more polished passer, as he was pretty raw coming in out of high school? So I guess in preparation and in game day, are the coaches there? Do we believe in the coaches to let these quarterbacks take the next step?
All right. Well, first, let me just say this. In defense of Doug Nussmeier, and I can tell you he's frustrated me with these toss sweeps to the short side of the field. Yes. Okay. Having said that, I'm the first to tell you, when you're talking about an offensive coordinator, there's a lot going on there that fans don't see, and things that might look counterintuitive or like a bad call. If it's a good offensive coordinator, he's setting something up like a chess match for later in the ball game. And sometimes you're going to have plays that maybe we don't think it looks right, that, hey, he's setting up for a touchdown in 3 drives from now.
Lane Kiffin did it with the best of them.
Yeah, and it happens, and it works, and that's what these guys get paid to do. And I agree with you that I have seen times where I'm like, that play's there. I mean, heck, a lot of the people that have been apologists for the McElwain era so far have said, hey, we've got wide receivers running wide open. And so not having people in place to do that, while that is a responsibility of coaches, but if we're talking about merely schematics, we can't really pin it on their schematic ineptitude. I think that we might have a guy in place between Nussmeier and McElwain that, can develop these guys. However, it's time to show us. No more excuses. If it's Del Rio, the guy's had his chance. If you roll with this guy, again, after what happened last year, and he falls flat on his face, when you've got an offensive line that is maturing, you got a lot of returners there, a lot of experience, and got some talent. When you've got the wide receiver depth and the running back depth that's emerging around this quarterback position, he has zero excuses to fail with Luke Del Rio, period. Even if it's a freshman, whether that be Allen, whether that be Franks, whether it be Trask, they should show some development. This is year 3. I understand you're losing some personnel on defense. I understand you've had adversity. You have to show a functional offense. There has to be improvement. That can't be going from 79th in passing to 75th, for 5 or 10 extra yards a game, unless you suddenly have Jordan Scarlett running for 1,500 this year. I'll be okay with that. But otherwise, you're going to have to show some points on the board against quality opponents. It got to move the ball against real teams, not just catching Kentucky early in the year or North Texas. It's got to be LSU. I know they won that ball game, but it's time to start putting up, more than 10 or 13 points in some of these big ball games.
I agree there. And I guess, if we're answering our question about Florida being a contender, if we look at just the quarterback position, I think it's kind of unanswered. I think this is more definitely, I don't want to take the easy way out, but, it's more of a wait and see what these quarterbacks can do if Florida is going to be a contender in 2017.
Yeah, and Dave, listen, you and I were talking off the air before this show started, and we're kind of reviewing how we were going to approach this subject. And one of the things I said to you is, until you get this quarterback position fixed, there's nothing else to talk about. It's been it's been almost 10 years since Florida's it's been Tebow.
Yeah.
We can't say Greer was the guy. He was good for like a game before he got kicked off the team or left for drugging or whatever. But you got a program that its identity was built on the fun and gun. And I know that's not the entirety of Florida football. I get that. But I mean in recent years, in the last several decades.
And what people know Florida football.
Yeah, what people that are, born after the 70s. I was born in the 70s. But listen, recent years, Florida was about tossing the football around, speed kills, razzle dazzle. You said hike and there's a touchdown. And that's gone. That's gone, and that's got to come back, and that can't happen without a quarterback. And so if they want to be a contender, they got to fix that first.
Yeah. Then we mentioned quarterback, it has to be fixed first. But Bill, I think we know, and I think we've seen enough where around quarterback, there is potential there. There are playmakers there. And if the offensive line can take the next step and mature, there is plenty of potential there that Florida at least makes. I mean, already right now, we know baseline, Florida is a contender for the SEC East. And, I guess if you look at it going forward, if you're in Atlanta, you never know what can happen. And I know that's kind of been the motto going into the game the last couple of years. You never know what can happen. But, with what Florida has around quarterback, and if that quarterback steps up, there is enough around him to be excited about.
Yeah, there really is. And, okay, here's what I did. I had to get a little nerdy because, I'm the five-star nerd.
Five-star nerd.
Okay, here's what I did. I went through the starting lineups and the two deeps between 2016 and 2017. And I assigned everybody a simple numerical value based on their experience, tossed out red shirts, 1 for freshman, 2 for sophomore, 3 for junior, and 4 for senior. And when you look at the offensive line, in 2016, your starters were 3, 2, 1, 2, and 1, because David Sharp was a junior. Everybody else was a sophomore or freshman. Okay, and so that averages out to 1.8. That's how young these guys were last year. The average guy was just under sophomore level, if you just take a rough average look at it like that. Okay, but in 2017, yes, Sharp is gone, but Ivy's now a junior. Tyler Jordan's going to be a junior. You got McCoy, Fred Johnson, and Juwan Taylor. There may be other starters. I know those positions aren't settled, but if that's your 5, Ivy, Jordan, McCoy, Johnson, and Taylor, you got 3, 3, 2, 2, 2. No more freshmen in the lineup. Guys that have had a year to develop their bodies, a new coach that's energetic, and the score is out to a 2.4. So it's a plus 0.6. You gained almost, you gained over half your on average experience all the way across. It's still a young line. There's still not a senior on there. You're still only talking about 2 upperclassmen starters. But I believe this offensive line still may not be great, but I believe they're going to start coming on. It's going to happen. And I think that Brad Davis walked into a great situation, because I think over the next 2 years, some of the work that Mike Summers put in, some of the natural growth and maturation of these kids that are on this line, and some of the experience now that they've had a full year together and returned 4 out of 5 starters, it's going to help. And it's going to be great for that young quarterback.
I'm also interested. I know we talked about it over the weekend in a big Twitter discussion we had. Is how does that offensive line shake out? I know we'll have a spring practice preview coming up, but before we dive into that just a little bit, do you think it's just as simple as, and this is like the only kind of preview we'll go about the offensive line before we dive into our spring preview later on in a couple of weeks, but is it as simple as Martez Ivy taking over at left tackle, or Juwan Taylor moving over from right to left tackle?
I think it is that simple, because I think Juwan Taylor looks like a hell of a right tackle. He just has that big, stocky body, and I like him over there. He was good there. I think Ivy might be a little longer, lankier kind of built than he is. I think he looks like more of a left tackle. But I think the best way to maintain continuity, give Ivy his crack out there. I believe he got, SEC Offensive Lineman of the Week when he had his chance out there, if that's what it was. And then you find one of these mini guard types that they brought in and plug them in, whether they be Tyler Jordan. I mean, heck, even Harkless, who was brought in as a tackle, Kavaris Harkless from Jacksonville, I believe, he played a little left guard this year, or you could have one of the Sandifer types that were brought in 2015. You've got a lot of kids that have had a year or two now that could be plug and play with him. So, yeah, I think you slide Ivy out. If not, I think a guy like Harkless or even Fred Johnson gets a chance, and they can try to keep Juwan Taylor where he's at.
Yeah, and not to mention the 2 freshmen, Kadeem Telford, TJ Moore, both 4 stars. So, definitely you don't want to see freshmen offensive linemen in the SEC. Florida's had some luck with it in recent years, but you don't want to have to keep continuing to do that. So, It's it's a great thing to have 2 4-star offensive linemen coming in, but you don't want to have to rely on those guys. And with what Florida has coming back, you shouldn't have to. And Bill, I think the main key I tweeted out is I think this is the first time we've been able to talk about the Florida offensive line where they have the best word I can think I could say about an offensive line: options.
Yeah, they got some numbers. I think we've already said more than 6 guys. But when McElwain came in, he only had 6. That's terrible. Thanks a lot, Muschamp.
Yeah, his old famous Disney turnstile quote that McElwain liked to use.
Yeah, and listen, you don't want to have to rely on a freshman at tackle. Juwan Taylor was lightning in a bottle.
Yep.
The guy, and I'm not saying this is demeaning, but he shed a fat suit and turned out to be a freaking stud. And
remember,
he wasn't even does that happen?
Yeah, and remember, he wasn't even starting when the season started. It was Fred Johnson out there at right tackle, and he was playing so bad they had to eventually try something else.
Yeah, and I really don't want to. I don't like the idea of putting a freshman at tackle in general. I want, if it's a guy like T.J. Moore that's a masher type, and you can put him at guard, even if it's futures at tackle, let him run straight ahead and hit somebody. I don't want him having to wheel and
think about it,
kick step into some guy that runs a 4.4 and weighs 280 pounds from FSU. You know what I mean? He doesn't need to protect an edge rusher.
Right. And I guess the other position we know we could talk about a transformation, and I talked about it last week. This is kind of what started the whole conversation was, in McElwain's 2 years, offensive line and wide receiver have been, to me, the 2 biggest transformations, of course, on offense, numbers-wise, and especially for wide receiver, production-wise, and actually having some guys out there you can trust to make some plays.
Yeah, that position looks a heck of a lot better. And, I was talking about that little experience number that I plugged in. Wide receiver or the skill positions, I kind of lumped in running backs and wide receivers. They were the biggest movers to the positive for what Florida has coming back, and registered a 0.8, which is almost on average, your starters are all a year older. And I know that sounds like, oh, well, of course they're a year older. No, because usually you're rolling over and have guys leaving. This is going to be a more experienced group, and it's not just experience. You're talking about real Gator wide receivers out here. You got Cleveland that's, 6'3", 6'2". You got, if James Robinson pans out, now they got 2 guys that look like playmakers that are tall. You got Callaway, Dre Massey's coming back.
Yep.
There's going to be competition. I mean, you're talking about guys like Swain and Hammond that Florida would have killed 4 or 5 years ago. That they're going to get backup minutes.
Right, and of course, Brandon Powell. He was Mr. Reliable to me toward the end of last year. He was he came on and was a security blanket for those quarterbacks. So I'd like to see how much playing time he'll get if Dre Massey stays healthy, can come back from what we heard he could potentially be last year. So Brandon Powell, no, not the most tallest wide receiver, of course, and I guess struggled at times, but he. I'd like the ball in his hands. I do expect more sometimes when the ball is in his hands for him to come and make a play or whatever. But like I said, toward the end of last year, he was just more consistent and more of a hands on the ball and helping the quarterbacks out.
Yeah, I like Brandon Powell. He just seems to lack that explosiveness. He's like a reliable player. I'm hoping Massey turns out to be that guy that instead of having a 30-yard catch and run has a 70. And Florida has missed that along with quarterback, along with offensive line. They're just getting it back now with Callaway and with Cleveland. But if they find a slot guy to go with those other 2, and their offensive line takes this next step, even if it's a little more than a baby step, a capable quarterback could come in here and feast.
Right. Oh, yeah. Because now we'll move on to the other side of the ball and defense. This is what's made Florida a contender for the SEC East the last 2 years when they've won it. This is what's made Florida. This is what's carried them to Atlanta. We know it's been said time and time again. This is the side of the ball where Will Muschamp definitely left his mark on Florida, and that's about the only place he helped Florida. And so, McElwain reaped the benefits. Jeff Collins reaped the benefits. He's now a head coach at Temple. No 2 coaches reaped the benefits more. Now it's Randy Shannon's turn to put his print on this defense, and these are more his players. More he had a name in bringing in. So, of course, you can look at defensive end is not a lot of depth there. C.C. Jefferson, Jordan Sherritt, now you have to start going and start thinking about guys there. And I know a guy we all love, and a guy I pointed out last year who I thought would raise on the scene is your boy Zuniga. And I know, Bill, you've done some research on Zuniga and how much you liked him. What's Florida getting in Zuniga, and can he take that next step? Because I know when I went back and looked at his production last year, I like what I saw numbers-wise, but when I saw who was against, he had a lot of his stats early on in the season against the likes of UMass and North Texas. Didn't necessarily hear from him from a while, and then kind of re-emerged toward the end of the season.
Yeah, and I think what you're seeing is a young guy. I mean,
yep.
As well as he did early on, I mean, those guys hit those ruts. Those guys hit those walls. And I think he's going to be a guy that can come off the edge, a guy that can set the edge in the running game at end. And I think he's going to be a big benefit. I think he at least gives them a starter quality backup behind Jefferson. And I wouldn't sleep on him. I mean, I know Jefferson's a 5-star, but it's not – and Jefferson has looked really good at times. But you never know, especially if they do depending on the looks they want to go with. I think Zuniga could be right there in the mix for a starting job. And Lord forbid we have any kind of injuries. I think he'll be very capable there.
Oh, you said the magic word, and that's what scares me. You said injuries. And if Florida – with what they have coming this year, we know, I think this starting 11 can be pretty good when you start looking at it. But if Florida hits the injury bug like they did last year, that's when I start getting worried, because Florida doesn't have a lot of quality depth, experience depth now with what they lost this past year.
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just backtrack one thing. I do want to disagree with you. I think the depth is actually pretty good at defensive end. Between Zuniga and I think Polite, okay. I know people have him pegged for
and Antonio Clayton.
And Clayton is time to emerge. He's got to. This is his year.
I guess what I should say is there's not a lot of proven behind them, so maybe that's where I kind of, I guess, go that way with it. But, I mean, like I said, I pointed out Zuniga as one of my breakout players last year, and it kind of did happen that way. I don't think I'd pick out a defensive end, and maybe Clayton if I had to pick one just because of his raw talent when he's coming out and, looking at that for him. But, yeah, I can see it. It's just that's just the one position that worries me a little bit.
Yeah, I just meant you got some bodies there. I mean, we haven't seen a lot from Clayton, but I believe Jordan Smith is primed. He had a redshirt year, and then Zach Carter that they took this year. Yep. So you've got some kids that have the ratings, they have the reputation. We'll just see if they can make it translate. But kind of getting back on target of where you were talking about, if Florida's going to be a contender this year, I don't believe they can survive another injury rash late like they had this year. And I know that we get caught up in the DBU. I know that Florida plays good defense. They got Randy Shannon there. But Florida also had an unprecedented level of real quality depth through recruiting. And I don't just mean stars. I mean identifying Quincy Wilson's, Gerard Davis's that were underrated. They were stacked, and even if they do have that talent now, it's going to be very young at most positions if they have to start going to that depth.
Right.
The starters, like you said, there's not a bad starting 11 here, but it gets young real fast, especially in the secondary.
Yeah, and I think what people go back and look at is after Florida's national championship 2006 season, you had Ryan Smith at cornerback. Then you had Earl Everett and Brandon Seiler and Jarvis Moss, and those guys left and went on. And in 2007, you had a complete rebuilt defense where Derek Harvey was on the line. And you had Joe Hayden, who was a freshman, coming in and playing cornerback, who I don't think he played much cornerback coming in when he was coming in at Florida. So, you had a lot of young guys who were having to step up in 2007. And now, while that defense gets slammed because that was a bad defense in Florida standards, it wasn't that bad of a defense. They were still good enough to make some plays. It wasn't a terrible defense by any means. But I think that's what kind of people are alluding to is when you lose that many starters and then having to shore up next year and having to prove and not carry the team like they did the year before.
Yeah, and it's funny because if you look at the previews coming out, and there is an excellent article for our listeners if you want to check it out on SB Nation. It talks about the returning, or it's called 2017 College Football Returning Production Rankings. And it has Florida right in the middle of the pack because it says, well, they've only got like 3 defenders coming back, like returning starters. And in a way, and that's even low for what they had. you do lose Quincy and Tabor, you lose Anzalone, you lose Gerard Davis, Ivy, you lose Brantley. And so in a way, it looks like your defense is completely gutted of its starters. But then again, because of the injuries they had last year, you've got 8 or 9 guys, maybe even 1 or 2 more that I'm leaving out, that started football games and played at a high level. They got it done pretty well there. And I know they had their breakdowns, but you guys got guys with a lot of experience. Now I'm going to drop this stat, a couple of stats on you here. I know you promised our listeners some surprising stats. Here it is. As I was going through looking at the production for myself and coming up with my nerdy little stats, I looked at, I believe, 13 different recorded categories of defensive statistics as held by the NCAA. You have solo tackles, assists, total tackles, loss, sacks, interceptions, yards, kind of goes from there. Of those 13, you've got several of them that are all like zeros or ones, like forced fumbles. Those were kind of spread around. But the categories where you had, significant stat totals, there were 8 of those. Of those 8, 1 of them was led by a defender that's leaving the team. 1. 7 of the other 8 are led by defenders that are coming back in 2017. And I'm talking about significant things. Total tackles. Marcel Harris was your tackle leader. And in solos. We talked about Zuniga. He led the team in sacks. I mean, I know he got them early in the year, but getting a sack is getting a sack at the University of Florida.
And he had a pretty good tackles for loss, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember his.
He did. That's the interesting thing. The one category that the departing defenders left was tackles for loss. Caleb Brantley led with 9.5. Well, Zuniga had 8.5.
Okay, yeah. If I knew,
so he almost led all of them. And even when you go back to the secondary, which the article I referenced earlier, they weighted their categories because they actually did scientific studies on what correlated to actual on-the-field success, and they said some of them were more important than others. They said passes defensed were one of the most, most important stat totals that you want to have coming back with experience. It said it's hard to replace. Well, guess what? Duke Dawson led the team in passes defense.
Wow.
Chauncey Gardner had the most interception yards, the highest average interception return yards.
And here's a good thing about Duke Dawson is that means teams had to target him because they knew Tabor and they knew Wilson would do their job. So Dawson, as good as he is, was still getting targeted because he was the worst of the 3, and he's still a very good player.
That's right. And listen, I am not saying, we'll just plug and play. We can lose 2 top 10 cornerback picks. No, I'm not saying that. I get it. I'm not a sunshine popper. Okay, it's going to be a problem. However, I'm saying, how can we mitigate that? We're looking at a scenario, how can Florida be a contender? Well, as I tweeted earlier today, you're looking at a secondary that in nickel packages, if Joseph Putu was to start somewhere in that secondary, you could have 4 seniors starting. 4! Wow. When was the last time Florida had 4 seniors starting in the secondary alone? Because you got Duke Dawson, you got Marcel Harris, you got Nick Washington, all seniors. You got some salty players back there. And if you got the safeties covered, that alone helps. Because these are the guys that are helping your corners on, on these post routes and everything else. So if you have those guys manning the middle of the field and a nickelback, and then one of them can slide out the corner, well, then suddenly you're just looking for one guy if you can stay healthy.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be the best at any particular spot as long as that competitive advantage and that greatness develops elsewhere. It's got to be somebody. And see, that is a problem. For a lot of years now, that competitive advantage, the identity of Florida football has been in that secondary. That's how Will Muschamp built his rosters, was the secondary. And so now it's got to change to where either the quarterback's got to set up the offense, have a really good defense and a really good offense. It's got to transform that identity. The good news is these stats tell us there are playmakers returning to this defense. We see it at safety, we see it at linebacker, we see it at defensive end. And I think we got a couple of good tackles there, but they're going to have to find some depth.
There you go. That was where I was going to go. I think 2 positions you can take and look at that are kind of opposites. I think we can feel good about linebackers and the young guys because we saw enough of those last year. But you go to defensive tackle, Taven Bryan, Kerry Clark, Luke Ankrum, Jack Applewhite. That's your starting 4 probably there. Not a lot of quality depth from what I think we've seen. We have to see more from those guys. I like what I've saw from Taven Bryant at times, but not consistent enough. Same with Clark, but Anchorman and Polite have a lot to prove there. And then you have to drop all the way down to playing some freshmen, Kyrie Campbell, or who's the junior college guy coming in, Tadeo Slayton, Elijah Conliffe. We've mentioned those guys when we did our signing day and recruiting previews there. Florida's going to have to rely on those freshmen, I believe, this defensive tackle position.
Yeah, I think they're going to have to. I mean, I think that Kyrie Clark, maybe a little bit of that Omar Hunter kind of mold. He's a really, really big guy. He's going to be a good nose there. I don't think he's the guy that necessarily collapses the pocket. Maybe he can prove to be that guy. I think that Taven Bryan is a little different than him that complements. I think he's going to be maybe your three technique type. If I'm totally wrong about that, I'm sorry. But he tends to make some plays. And, you know, Thomas Goldcamp was talking on 247 in one of his pieces the other day about how he sometimes gets turned, sometimes gets knocked off the ball. But I think he's a good one. But they're going to need two, maybe all three of those guys to compete. The thing that concerns me on the defensive line right now, when people talk about Polite, is I think he was listed at 6'2", 271, is how much good weight can he hold? Same thing for CeCe Jefferson. He was listed at like 6'1", 266. That guy's not getting up to 300 pounds unless his game suffers. You know, so they really need these freshmen to get in there. I think Polite's going to give them quality minutes as a combo lineman like Jefferson did, but I think both those guys are best off outside in those big looks.
Yeah, because I think what scares me is when Caleb Brantley wasn't on the field last year, the running game, they gave up a chunk of yards, a good bit. Number first and foremost, that Arkansas game, that game, wow. I mean, you know, that it was Brantley was on the field a lot in that game, and it really showed. You could go back the first half of the LSU game where Darius Geis was lighting Florida up a good bit. We know what Dalvin Cook can do, but he did his thing against Florida. Alabama eventually did its thing as well. You know, Florida's always more recently been always able to lay its hat on stopping the run, and it's helped that defense tremendously. But with what they have coming back and what they missed when Brantley wasn't on the field already last year, that's what worries me there. And if you want to be a contender in the SEC, you have to stop the run.
Yeah, I agree with you. And not only that, the pressure to me is on this defensive line this year, because they do have some veterans to help out any young corners that have to get in the game. I mean, it's one thing if Duke Dawson or if Chauncey Gardner gets out there and you don't miss a beat and, oh, wow, we found our surprise corner and we're good to go, then fine. But if not, they're not going to be able to play like they did against Iowa when they told Tease Tabor and they told Quincy Wilson, well, you're just on your own back here and you may need 6 seconds because we're going to just do our thing up front. No, you're going to have to get after the passer, because if they don't have, you know, really good cornerbacks, you're going to get them eaten alive. So they need to find somebody that can come off the edge. They're going to need to find somebody that can collapse the pocket, or else there's going to be trouble.
Now, before we move on, because I think, you know, talking about going and stopping the run, we can bring in other teams that is on Florida's schedule and how that works into there. But before we move on to the who Florida will play and, you know, how that has something to do with how they're going to contend for the SEC, the hidden, I think it's not going to be talked about enough nationally maybe. I think us Gator fans know our special teams. And we know how important they're going to be. We've seen the difference Eddie Pinheiro made already this past season. Johnny Townsend is one of the biggest weapons Florida has, probably the best punter in the nation. I don't think it can be stressed enough how important those two guys are. And if Callaway can return to his freshman form, returning punts, the first half of last season, there was just something not right there with Callaway and the punt returns. It got better as the season went on. But I don't think it can be stressed enough with Townsend and Pinheiro how much of a weapon, how weapons those are for Florida.
Hey, you know, let's talk about the special teams in general for a second. I mean, when we talk about the Urban Meyer era, people remember Tebow and Spikes and all the athletes he had there, but special teams made that what it was.
How many punts did Chris Rainey block?
I think 45, 45. I mean, the South Carolina game that propelled them to the title game when they had 3.
Oh, Jarvis Moss, yeah.
I won't say what that game's called on the air, but or how about in the SEC championship game in 2006? That game was turned around by a buff punt by Arkansas that we recovered. You know,
Wandy Pierre-Louis
right after halftime, and it turned that whole game.
Right after halftime, yep.
special teams matter. The good news is this. I know that we have a much maligned coach on staff coaching special teams in Greg North, but there has been some good trajectory.
He's still on staff?
Yeah, he is. He's doing the work in my living room right now. But hey, listen, there's an ESPN special teams efficiency ranking that kind of factors in how each special team snap for a team contributes to points allowed or points scored. In 2015, the rank was 62nd, compared to 2005, 6, and 7, and 8, when Urban Meyer's teams were 1st, 11th, 16th, and 3rd. So you see the difference there. However, this year, that shot all the way back up to 16th. That's a big deal. Now, I think a lot of that, I'm not going to be ready to give out all to Nord because that's a good punter and a good kicker.
Right.
Making field goals, not aiming for the long snapper's butt with your field goal attempts and letting them get blocked, that matters. But that's the first time, and it's the highest it's been in a few years. So it's moving in the right direction there. You had 7 kick blocks allowed in 2015. Again, I think part of that's a kicker. Only 1 this year. That's tremendous improvement. We didn't have a blocked kick, didn't have a blocked kick for 3 years. Not since 2013 had they had one on the Gator team. Well, in 2016, they got 2. So there's improvement there. Really bad in kickoff return defense, 110th in the nation. That's the worst since 2000. Well, they were 100th in 2003, so this is worse than forever. 96 in punt return defense. There's no excuse for that. You should have gunners at the University of Florida that can get down there and get these guys. So that's got to have some improvement there. But overall, I do think the special teams are moving in the right direction. They do have to find a punt returner. They need to find somebody that can house the football.
Agree there. So now we've looked at the players, we've looked at some of the coaches and how they can help players. Now we're going to move on quickly before we wrap this up is, the schedule is such a big part of how Florida can become a contender in 2017. Luckily, the home schedule sets up great. You got after the Michigan game in Dallas, you have Tennessee at home. You have A&M at home. You have LSU at home. FSU at home. And of course, Georgia and Jacksonville. Florida doesn't have to leave the state of Florida. I have to go back and look. For the Michigan game, what else? Kentucky game, right? Yep. That's
the only 3 away games are Kentucky, Missouri, and South Carolina.
Yeah, so there we go. And so they go to Dallas for Michigan. So only 4 games away from the state of Florida.
Yeah, so, and if they got that's right, away from state of Florida, and then Jacksonville. But if you tailor-made a schedule to say, I want this to be my coming out party and I want to make a high-profile splash in recruiting and in the national media and show people that we've either arrived or we're on the way to arriving, because, again, I think we need to give the guy another year. If you're willing to stick with McElwain, you need to give another year. But this is perfect. Yep. You're playing Jim Harbaugh and Michigan when they lose just about everybody. You can be the talk of the town if you beat them on opening weekend. You get Tennessee at home for revenge. You got LSU after that whole debacle last year. Really kind of another revenge game, even though you already beat them. They're going to want to rub that in.
Yep.
You've got Georgia. You got FSU coming to town. Georgia or FSU is the moment. That's the one I've got circled on my calendar. They got to win that game. But yeah, it's there, but it's not an easy schedule, and there's some pitfalls. I'll see what you think about the difficulty.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it will be between Florida and Georgia when the SEC media gathers to pick who they're going to win the divisions. Probably, I think media is going to fall in love with Georgia, and for good reason. They got a returning quarterback who seems to be a stud,
and their whole defense.
And their whole defense. And we know Kirby Smart. Even if they probably didn't have their whole defense returning, Kirby Smart's he's going to be like Will Muschamp. He's going to have a defense. So Jacob Eason returns. He's got a stud quarterback there. And of course, if Sony Michel, Nick Chubb, those guys surprisingly both came back. You thought they were going to the NFL, so if media picks Georgia, I can't complain with that. If Florida was in the same situation and had all those players coming back, I'd be picking that same team.
Yeah, honestly, if I was not sitting here breaking this down, and I may pick Georgia, and I know people are going to hate me for that. Their schedule is far less daunting. This is their schedule. You got Appalachian State, at Notre Dame, Samford, Mississippi State, at Tennessee, at Vandy, Missouri, a bye week into Florida, South Carolina at home, at Auburn, Kentucky, and Georgia Tech.
So who's their West opponent besides Auburn?
Mississippi State at home.
Okay, they'll be better. But
whereas Florida's got to tackle Michigan, they got Tennessee, they got LSU, Texas A&M, and Florida State. That's a tough road. And I know Florida State's not an SEC. I'm just saying it's an easier schedule. They had the 16th ranked defense in the whole country last year, and they got the whole unit back. They got Chubb, Michelle. It's all about easing for them, and it's all about finding out if Kirby Smart is for real. He may not be. He may be Muschamp 2.0.
He may be Muschamp. And the two problems I see with Georgia is they lost their best playmaker in Isaiah McKenzie, so they need another receiver to step up. And as good as Chubb and Michelle were, that offensive line did them no favors whatsoever.
Yeah, no, and honestly, they do have a lot to prove. I mean, we talk about Florida having a lot to prove. Their program has not lifted under Kirby Smart yet and under Eason. And Eason could be an absolute bust. And if he is, they may not finish second in the SEC East. And Florida could run away with it. So don't think I'm just pulling their chain just to do it, because I'm just saying some metrics are in their favor. But they're still Georgia. And the difference between Georgia and Iowa remains Herschel Walker. So until they prove otherwise, they're just still Georgia. Another team I would watch out for.
So all my Georgia friends listen to that. Yeah, that was a good laugh there.
Let's put somebody over Georgia who I think could be a surprise in the East. Maybe not a contender for the East, but you got to watch out for is Kentucky. They got a ton coming back. They were a feisty team. They lost their first two games and really took off after then. And Kentucky is a road game for the Gators this year after Tennessee. And so I'm a little concerned with that. They're going to have a lot of emotion early in the season with Michigan and want to get back at Tennessee for what happened last year. Florida's going to have to be businesslike about that game and come out of there with a win.
Yeah, their defense definitely has to get better. You did mention, how the beginning of last season, Mark Stoops is known for defense, but that defense was absolutely terrible. And they made Luke Del Rio look like a, Heisman Trophy winner. So, I think that's how bad we know that defense was when they made Luke Del Rio look.
They got some quality wins down the stretch. And,
but they
after those first few weeks, they got a lot better.
And here it is. And I was about to go into that. Once they put in Steven Johnson at quarterback, that completely changed that offense. They beat Louisville to end the season. They didn't have a good bowl showing here in Jacksonville against Georgia Tech. But, going against that Georgia Tech triple option offense, that can be excused a little bit. But you're right. I think Kentucky has found their quarterback. So I think that's a theme I'll go with when we look at these teams right quick, because there's going to be some better quarterback play in the SEC East when you look at, of course, with Georgia brings back and Jacob Eason and South Carolina with Bentley. But another team I want to dive into was the live champions and last year's pick to, I think, go undefeated and light the world on fire because everybody was falling in love with them. I'm going to exaggerate a little bit there. But Tennessee, now what happens? Butch Jones has to be on the hot seat after falling apart last year, lost to South Carolina, lost to Vandy after finally beating Florida, couldn't handle it. Yes, injuries played a part, but Butch Jones, a very average coach, if you ask me. What can they do after Josh Dobbs leaves and Jarrett Guantrano? I cannot say that guy's name to save my life.
The guy with the smaller forehead is fine.
Jarrett Guarantano. There we go. I think I got it that time. But they lose Kamar. They lose Hurd. They lose Dobbs. And that defense absolutely fell apart at the end of last season where I mentioned how Kentucky made Luke Del Rio look like a Heisman Trophy winner. They made Tennessee's defense made Kyle Shermer, Vandy's quarterback, look like a Heisman Trophy winner. So, they have a lot to fix on Rocky Top.
Yeah, they do. And, I'm going to look at this as from a mentality level, and just kind of a program mojo level. I think had they not beaten Florida last year, I think that program was going to crack from inside. And it was just really a missed opportunity. And that's, I think, why a lot of Gator fans were upset. But I think we're right back there. And, Butch Jones has turned into a walking cliche machine, with these five-star heart. I mean, it's just absurd. And it's such a bizarre journey they've had. If you look at it in reverse to them sitting in, Bristol, Tennessee, after beating Virginia Tech, having trophies and confetti and the whole bit after like the early part of the season. And it's like, what are you doing? And then to see where they ended up, I think if he doesn't get off to a good start, there could be real trouble for him, and that seat's going to heat up real fast. They're going to light some moonshine underneath him, and it's going to be bad.
I tell you what, that Florida game, it was going to be huge anyway, but they played Georgia Tech week 1. They lose that game in Atlanta. I think they play on that Monday night, Labor Day night. Oh, that Florida game probably becomes a very, very must win.
He might be coaching for his job again.
Yeah, he might just
because then they're going to be right back full circle. Here's the one thing, though.
They have recruited well.
But that's really taken a fall this year.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a couple of good kids at the top and took, a lot of lower rated kids. It has not been the same. Gosh, let me look real quick to see where they even finished. I think it was
maybe even as bad as their defense was, they lose their best defensive player, Derek Barnett, who I really like. Cam Sutton, I believe, is no longer there as well. Jalen Reeves-Maben. Now, some of those guys didn't play last year due to injury as well, so they're kind of used to playing without them. But Tennessee, I'd say that, they have recruited, especially this past year. It was kind of 3-star heaven for this past recruiting class there. So
it was. I mean, in 2014 they signed 16 blue chips, or 4 and 5 stars combined. Then 16 in 2015, 10 in 2016, and only 5 this year. That's a tremendous decline. I think it is what it is. I think that the brand and the sales pitch that he had, the brick by brick, and they're saying, well, where's the wall? I think that's what it is, and I think it's running out of steam, and it's time for him to put up or shut up, more than McElwain.
Completely agree. South Carolina, I mentioned Jake Bentley, quarterback, took over there about halfway through the season. That kind of sparked the with Florida burn a red shirt late in the season when Del Rio went down injury, and kind of fans were kind of over the Appleby thing. But no, that didn't happen. But Jake Bentley, I think he finished with about 1,400 yards, completed 66% of his passes. He was playing good until he came to the Swamp last year.
Yeah, he was, and I don't think that South Carolina necessarily becomes a contender for the East unless he really becomes a good quarterback, and that could happen. I look at them as a team that's going to become a lot to handle because that's what Muschamp gives you. He's going to have a physical defense. He's going to be very hard to beat. He's going to try to constrict you and wait for you to make a mistake and keep the game close. And so they're going to be a thorn in the side of the SEC East. And really, I think the SEC East in general is going to be better. Referring back one more time to returning production, of all the teams in the country who return the most production, like 4 or 5 of the top 10, Kentucky, South Carolina, Georgia, and Vanderbilt are all in the top 10 in the nation of what they've got coming back. And so, and then Florida's going to have a good team. So I think from top to bottom.
And all those teams you mentioned, quarterbacks returning.
Yeah.
That's a big thing. I mean, we've mentioned how the one reason the SEC East slumped so much, they didn't have good quarterbacks, and now they got at least quarterbacks they can count on.
Yeah, they have. They found their guys. It's going to be tough, and especially for Florida having a new secondary to replace and trying to find an identity in the pass rush and in the back of their defense. That's going to be an issue. But I do think Florida can field some guys to get it done out there. It's just going to be a tough road. This great schedule that Florida's got is not going to be a cakewalk.
No, and to kind of finish up the SEC East a little bit, Vanderbilt has Kyle Shermer returning and Ralph Webb. Surprisingly, it seems like he's been there forever. So Vanderbilt has their top 2 playmakers on offense returning. We think we know, even though they lose Zach Cunningham with Derek Mason at the helm, they'll have a good defense. And they've given Florida fits the past 2 years. So it's a thing that's just Vanderbilt in Florida. It's just kind of been this thing where they're gonna give Florida fits more times than they're not. More than likely. In Missouri, probably the worst team in the SEC. Can they get back? I think the big surprise last year was their defense. Can Barry Odom fix that? I think that's the biggest question there. But if we also look at the West teams Florida plays, Texas A&M, Kevin Sumlin's going to be on the hot seat more than likely. They have to find a replacement for Trevor Knight. And so, Hubenak returns for A&M, I believe. So it'd be interesting to see if he takes a bull by the horns and runs with that. I have to replace Myles Garrett as well. So a lot to replace and a big year for Kevin Sumlin.
Yeah, but until further notice, I'm going with Bama until somebody proves they can knock him off. I mean, it's just becoming such a machine over there. I mean, it could happen. And we talk about, can Florida be a contender? I would really like it if somebody upset Bama in the West. It sure would be nice if Ole Miss shows up in Atlanta.
Yeah, but we're just reviewing who Florida's played. So out of the West, also, of course, LSU. They'll visit the Swamp after last year's Hurricane Matthew debacle from their side, I believe. Matt Canada comes in as offensive coordinator. I think he has a pretty good review from people out there, media and coaches alike. So Darius Geis returns. Danny Etling, Will Brandon Harris actually came out today and said he's transferring, so he won't be at LSU. So it would definitely be Danny Etling's job from here on out. Played okay down the stretch for LSU last year, but with Geis and Etling returning, Canada Orgeron, rallied the troops, and of course they wanted to play for him last year and help him get the job. He's the man now. So I think LSU once again, with all that talent, can they live up to it?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. They're still LSU. They've got a pretty good roster over there. That's a Shark Tank, man. I mean, who knows? I mean, and even for Bama, as tough as that division is, man, I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody like that emerge out of there.
Yeah. So we talked A&M, we talked LSU, and of course, I think we still have to talk Bama just because they're the best. We won't talk the whole West, but of course, where does Jalen Hurts go from here? Can he take the next step? And of course, the reason we're kind of bringing them up is if Florida's going to be a contender, more than likely it'll be Bama in Atlanta again. So can Florida make that 3 matchups in a row? Can Jalen Hurts grow? Steve Sarkisian's gone after his 1-game stint as offensive coordinator at Bama. Who do they replace there? I know Mike Locksley's name is being brought up since he was already co-offensive coordinator with his title. And how much? I mean, they have to replace so much on defense. And Ryan Anderson and Tim Williams, Jonathan Allen, Tomlinson, Reuben Foster, Marlon Humphrey. I mean, come on. I mean, it's just ridiculous. All the talent they lost as well.
It is, man. But let me drop some stats on you here. In 2008, when Florida won the national championship, they had a blue chip percentage, meaning the percentage of their roster that was 4- and 5-star recruits from the 4-year cycle before them. That cumulative blue chip percentage of that team was 61%. So 6 out of 10 kids were 4- and 5-star recruits. That's awesome. You see that all throughout past champions of recent years. This 2016 Bama team, and I know they didn't win because anything can happen on a given Saturday. You can roll the dice once and hope for a 3, but if you roll it 10 times, you're not going to get 10 threes. Yeah. Okay. The cumulative blue chip percentage of 2016 Bama was 76%.
Whew.
The class they signed in 2015 was 83%. They have 21 5-stars on their roster. That's enough for a whole team. So
wow.
I'm sorry if I'm going to Vegas right now and I can bet on one team and bet on Bama.
Exactly.
I'm hoping for the Gators. I'm going to believe in my heart that Franks or Trask is going to be the best quarterback the NCAA has ever seen. But if I'm going to Vegas, I'm betting on Bama.
Right, and that's kind of where we're going with this show here. It's Florida Contender. We talked about the East and how they kind of stack up there. We mentioned it's probably Florida, Georgia. We're going to be there. So we feel more than safe saying Florida definitely is a contender in the SEC East.
Sure.
You in the East, you get to Atlanta.
Any given Saturday.
But here it is. You have to go into that game with probably no more than 1 loss. So we've mentioned Florida's schedule and the teams they have to face there. They get to Atlanta versus Bama. Can you win that game? And here's the thing. You win that game, you get to the playoffs. That's why if you want to, you have to marry the SEC championship and the college football playoff together because Bill, we've seen it the past 2 seasons. And I know even though as far-fetched as it seemed, Jim McElwain's first season, Florida was going into the FSU game with only 1 loss. And of course, the questions were being asked if they lost to LSU on the road that year when Treon Harris almost brought them back to a good comeback win. That was the only loss on the road. If there was some way they could beat FSU and Alabama, Florida was in the playoff that year.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how close it's been. Granted, it was close and far away at the same time.
Yeah, there's been a lot of that in Gainesville lately, and that's why people used to defend Will Muschamp, saying, "Well, we only lost 10-7. We were right there." And 3 points might as well have been 3 miles, And
yeah.
It's like, well, all we got to do is just beat FSU and Bama. We beat everybody else. Well, there's a big gulf between some of these other teams.
And we've talked about it.
It's time for McElwain to make a statement. He needs a statement this year. I don't think Florida is a statistical contender or an odds-on favorite. I think they've got some long odds. They've pretty much overhauled their coaching staff. They've got the likelihood is they're going to have a freshman quarterback. They're retooling their defense, plug and play, and may have some, completely rebuilt units over there. They have under-recruited against some of these SEC West teams. They have not met the metrics to have a top 3 class, which every single top 3 in their conference, which every playoff team has done, which every SEC championship team has done, except for 2010 Auburn. The stats aren't lining up. The metrics aren't showing or forecasting them to be a champion this year. But the schedule is favorable. Anything can happen. If they can coast through the East, if Georgia is Georgia and Florida is Florida, and they take care of business there, and McElwain proves to be a guy that can get his players ready, anything can happen. Bama may not be there. And even if they are, Clemson did beat them. Yep. So maybe Florida can too. And if they catch some lightning in a bottle, if they catch a little bit of that magic, you never know.
So that's what we think will make Florida a contender. And this about previous hour we've talked about. That's what we think Florida will make. That's what we think will make Florida a contender or not, or will hold them back from being a contender in 2017. So that's about it for this show. Bill, you got anything else you want to add? I know you just kind of wrapped it up there yourself.
No, I just think they're a year away. That's my honest opinion. I cannot wait to watch them. I think that they're going to have a functional offense this year. I think Florida's going to have a very good football team this year. I think the young defense or younger players on defense, and I think some of whoever's in their quarterback may take their lumps. We may have some disappointment. You almost always do as a football fan, but I think it's going to be a good season. I'm hoping things are tracking in the right direction and continue to do so throughout the year. But if you're a person that is really waiting to see, is this going in the right direction, give the guy one more year. Give the guy one more year. As long as he shows you a functional offense, if he shows you a good win against a quality opponent this year, look for 2018 to be that title run season.
Yeah, that was set up pretty nicely there for the Gators. Thank you guys for listening. Remember to subscribe and share on iTunes. Leave a review if you enjoyed Gators Breakdown, and you can find us on SoundCloud, YouTube, and follow me, David Waters, on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC, GatorDave_SEC, and Bill Sykes on Twitter at RealBSykes. So on the next Gators Breakdown, I've kind of set it up today. Barrett Sallee would join us. We'll talk about this topic and maybe just a little bit more, get his opinion, a national opinion from how much Florida is a contender. Barrett is on SiriusXM and SEC Smothered and Covered on V Sporto. So we'll get his thoughts on the Florida program and kind of going into spring practice and how he sees Florida as a contender. So for Bill, I'm Dave. And once again, thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown.